Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria. So I know that quite a lot of you guys like it when I talk about Game of Thrones, and I like watching Game of Thrones, and I've had a lot of questions about the weapon used by the White Walker that fights Jon Snow. So first of all, we shouldn't necessarily expect weapons used by fantasy beings, species, whatever you want to call them, to necessarily correspond to historical weapons. So first thing that I want to say is it kind of doesn't matter what you call the weapon, whether we call it a type of sword or a type of polearm. It doesn't really matter, but a lot of people have asked me this question, so let's have a little look at it. So here we've got the pretty little Jon Snow there, Kit Harington, and here we have his opponent. This is the White Walker. I haven't read the book, so I don't know if this dude has a name. But interestingly, whatever his weapon is, he wears it on his back. How does it attach there? How does he get it off? We don't know. These are one of the many mysteries of the White Walkers, I presume. Maybe they have some kind of magnetic power where anything that they stroke their back against, it magically sticks to. I don't know. But anyway, his weapon is suspended there from his back, miraculously, mystically even, and it appears to have a shaft made of a stick with some, what is that, feathers or thongs or something tied to it. We can only presume they have some kind of ritual significance, I suppose. Nevertheless, here is the dude again, and we can see him a little bit clearer now. And his armour, is it armour? I don't really know. It has the look of armour, but it looks a bit floppy to me, so I don't know that that is really armour. And I don't know that the White Walkers think that they need armour, because they think that they're pretty much invulnerable to mortals, that is, until they meet Jon Snow's blade, but more about that in a minute. So he's still wearing his weapon on the back, but he does pull it off. We don't know how. We don't know how it attaches. And it does have kind of thong-like or feather-like bits to the top and bottom of the grip. Now in this picture where he jumps off the first story of the building, you can see that the shaft of the weapon, or hilt if you want to call it that, is about the same length as the blade. The blade appears to be straight, perhaps double-edged, or is it edged at all? We don't really know. It appears to be made of something bone-like or stone-like, or perhaps it's just even ice, magically treated ice. Once again, I haven't read the book, so I don't know if that's explained in the books. I suspect not, but they've interpreted it in the series as a sort of natural obsidian-like or ice-like material. And in this image you can clearly see that the shaft is about the same length as the blade. So, talking about historical weapons for a minute, what would that make it? Well, on one hand you could say it would make it a polearm. It's clearly a blade attached to a stick. If you look at historical polearms, the obvious weapon, which is a blade attached to a stick, sometimes known as a sword on a stick, is called a glaive. That's G-L-A-I-V-E. And so we could call this a glaive, although, to be honest, glaives usually have longer poles. They are more pole weapons, whereas this actually isn't really very long, actually. It's only about the length of a long sword, shall we say. It doesn't have a particularly long blade, but it has a very long handle. So here we come to the next image, and again we can see in this, we can see the dangly bits at the top and bottom of the shaft, and we can see that he grips it with his right hand at the top, which is normal for a two-handed sword or most chopping polearms. And he mostly cuts with it, he doesn't thrust with it, which is perhaps unusual. I have to say, if I was given this weapon and told to fight with it, I would mostly use it like a spear or a bayonet, because it's got a good length to it if you hold it nearer the back, and it's straight. And it's got a long shaft, so it actually, the way he's using it doesn't seem very logical, because it's got a relatively short blade and a very long hilt. However, we could say what this is roughly analogous to is a two-handed sword with a short-ish blade. There were two-handed swords which didn't have particularly long blades, an example being the Highland Claymore. Highland Claymores often have very long hilts and not particularly long blades. They're usually longer blades than this weapon that the White Walker has, it has to be said, but they're usually not really longer than an average bastard sword or longsword, whereas they do have very long hilts on them. We can see in this image, sorry for the pixelation, but that was as good as I could get it, pulling the video images off YouTube, and you can see here that he does grip it like a two-handed sword. His dominant hand at the top of the grip, his non-dominant hand near to the bottom of the grip, although not completely at the bottom. So I suppose we could say that this is more or less a two-handed sword without a handguard. Presumably the White Walkers don't think they need handguards because they're pretty much invulnerable to mortals, and you know, if mortal weapons aren't going to harm their hands, then why bother with a handguard after all? So here we go, you can see him gripping it again here, and essentially I would call this a form of crude two-handed sword. It's kind of like if all you had at your disposal was bits of wood, bits of leather and bits of stone or bone, then you could make a two-handed sword that looked roughly like this. Obviously we know what happens next. We know that Jon Snow's blade works against this weapon in a way that other people's weapons don't, but that's by the by and outside of the scope of this video. So there we go guys. I would say that initially I would have called this object, this weapon, a glaive, but really in hindsight it's not really. It's really a two-handed sword, and it's certainly used more like a two-handed sword. It just doesn't have a handguard on it. Cheers guys!